Welcome to the first entry of my Zelda review videos, a series where I'll be completing and ranking every single mainline Zelda game, not counting spin-offs or multiplayer entries. The rules are simple. The credits must roll in order to count the game as completed. Walkthroughs are discouraged, but allowed when necessary. Save states are also allowed when available in an official capacity, like on NSO. At the end of the video, I'll be going through a list of criteria and ranking the game item by item, and at the end, we'll compile the scores to give the game a grade out of 100. Stay tuned for my score, and comment down below whether you agree or disagree with my analysis. I'd love to know what you think. Now, I've already actually played through Zelda 1 once, fairly vanilla on NSO last year, and so I was planning on doing a 3-heart challenge run to mix things up to keep this playthrough feeling fresh. But then I realized that there was a special version of Zelda 1 on NSO, subtitled Living the Life of Luxury. So this special version actually makes the game easier with a couple of maxed out upgrades, including the white sword, which I didn't even acquire on my first playthrough. So I decided to go with this version. I won't be ranking the game based on difficulty, really for any of the games. I won't be ranking them based on difficulty. So I don't feel the need to give myself a vanilla experience or anything for the sake of review. But anyway, y'all know the story. Ganon kidnaps Zelda, and we have to rescue both her and the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom. Let's just get into it. Now, before we start ranking the game, I'm going to summarize my gameplay, so if you're only interested in this video as a review, I'd skip to the end of the video. So, I started the game, and realized I already had plenty of items. This was going to be a lot easier than my first playthrough. I played Zelda 1 for the first time last year, and it was actually kind of agonizing. I had a lot of fun, but the combat was some of the most challenging of any Zelda game. I knew already it'd be easier this time, so I found a shop that sold a key, and I went ahead and bought that too. I figured since I was making things easy for myself, I might as well lean into it. I already pretty much remembered where the first dungeon was, so I plundered some nearby caves for rubies, and then headed over. The first dungeon's an easy start, so I plowed through the enemies, pushed a block or two, found an incomprehensible hint from an old man, and explored until I found the bow. I did get picked up by a wall master right before the boss room, but since NSO allowed me to rewind my game, I took advantage of that, and undid my mistake. I was on to the boss. A couple of sword beams across the room, and easy dodging, and the dragon is slain. So with that, I got my first piece of the Triforce. It felt like everything would be smooth sailing moving ahead, but let's see if that's true. So my first issue was that I didn't even remember where level 2 was. But after exploring the world for a bit and finding some more rubies and shops, I found level 3. So I was a little bit lost until I found my map, and then remembered that certain symbols didn't have the same negative cultural impact in Japan that they had in the West. I didn't remember exactly where the raft was, but I had remembered that I'd missed it on my first playthrough, and didn't even know it was hidden away in level 3 until consulting a guide when I'd gotten stuck. So I made sure to explore until I found it. Now I found the boss Manhandla, and let my arrows loose until it was defeated. Another easy dungeon knocked out pretty quick. But there were a couple of Dark Nut rooms that made a dent in my heart, so I'd have to be more careful with not getting hurt in the future. Moving on from level 3, I could still not remember where level 2 was. So I headed north on a whim, and headed up a mountainside. A couple of screens after a looping mountain trail screen, and I had stumbled upon the entrance to level 5. Was I going too fast? I couldn't even find level 4. But it was here in level 5 that I found my first bombable wall puzzles. And I remember how hard they were given that there weren't any visible cracks in the walls. I just had to deduce that, given no other way forward, there might be a way forward that wasn't even obvious yet. I did realize that I wouldn't be able to progress without the ladder, an item from either level 2 or 4, I couldn't remember which, one of the ones I'd accidentally skipped. So I left the dungeon to look for either of those. I hunted around the overworld and finally ran into level 4. I found the ladder halfway through the dungeon, encountered some tough Dark Nuts, but beat the level pretty quick. With the ladder in hand, I returned to level 5. It wasn't too hard with my newly acquired item to go back through the dungeon, to get past the room I got stuck on, and get to the boss. I was a bit sloppy with heart management, but I beat the boss pretty quickly, and nabbed another piece of the Triforce. It's been interesting to happen to play these dungeons slightly out of order, and it really hasn't felt grating by any means to do so. It's felt like a fun challenge to figure out what I can accomplish in my own way, making this playthrough really feel like mine. I'm having my own unique experience. It wasn't too hard to look around for level 6. I found it in the graveyard and went through the dungeon. The enemies were definitely more of a challenge, and I was remembered at how tough it was in my first playthrough to take on swarms of enemies. It's easy to get overwhelmed in a room and get cornered. That's kind of the heart of Zelda 1's difficulty. Most dungeon rooms are enemy challenges, and it's up to you to be aware of what's trying to attack you from all sides. It's been a lot easier with the white sword in hand, and I must have some kind of arrow upgrade too, because the boss Goma went down in a single hit. A couple of challenging rooms, but another quick dungeon overall. Navigating through dungeons hasn't really been the challenge yet, but I know that will change both at the end of this game and throughout the series. See, when I think of a Zelda dungeon, I think of a labyrinthian puzzle, a maze full of Rubik's Cubes in a way. Zelda 1 doesn't quite have that. It has a maze, but it's a simple one, and it's certainly full of minotaurs and plenty of them, to continue the metaphor. Anyway, while exploring around for the next dungeons that I couldn't quite remember where they were, I found the Lost Woods. A nearby old man seemed like a suspicious place for a hint, but he required payment for information. Thanks to the power of NSO, I could pay the old man, receive the hint, and then rewind time so that it was as if I had never given him a single rupee. What a time to be alive. So with this information, I navigated the Lost Woods, but realized it didn't take me anywhere I couldn't have already reached thanks to the raft. So I poked around the rest of the overworld, checking corners of the map I hadn't tried yet, and I found a moblin in a cave who gave me a gift of 10 rubies, bearing that famous phrase, "It's a secret to everybody." I traveled near the coast, found an extra heart piece guarded by Octoroks, searched the nearby forest, and then suddenly, at last, came upon the place my heart had been searching for. Level 2. I feel like I've spent the whole game looking for this place, and I'm finally here. It feels kind of funny going into the second dungeon of the game with all of these items and heart containers already, but it's kind of awesome at the same time. Hopefully it's a cakewalk. An update, it was a cakewalk. The hardest thing was just that it took a couple of rooms for me to find the dungeon map, so I wasn't exactly sure where I was headed at first. But once I got my bearings, I was able to book it to the boss, defeat it almost instantly, and nab another piece of the Triforce. I almost wonder if this Life of Luxury edition cheapens some of the challenge of Zelda 1, but at the same time, I've paid my dues. I've already beaten the game once already, so it really is nice to be playing it with the difficulty rebalanced with better items on my side. I hope Zelda 2 has an option like this because, I don't know, I've just found that starting that game seems almost impossible. But anyway, on my way looking for Dungeon 7, which I could not remember where it was, I found a gambling cave. With NSO Rewind on my side, I decided I couldn't choose wrongly, so with a couple of cheap rewinds, I made enough rubies where I wouldn't have to worry about running out of arrows ever again. Well, I'll tell you this, I didn't find level 7, but I did burn a bush and find level 8, so let's see if I have enough items to complete it. Update, there were some challenges. I lost my hearts pretty quickly, and the mini-bosses throughout the dungeon didn't make things easier. And between them, the regular swarms, and the final boss, I was actually pretty low on hearts and just relying on my rewind ability so that I could go back in time whenever I got hit by an enemy to avoid a game over. Not a glamorous way to play, but it was effective. I had enough keys to breeze through, beat the boss, and complete 7/8 of the Triforce. We're almost there. And to be frank, I felt like I had explored the entire overworld and hadn't found where level 7 was, so I googled it. It was the only thing I looked up in this playthrough, so I feel like I've mostly kept my pride. With this newly acquired information, I headed over to the dungeon. Of course, part of what made this dungeon tricky to find was that it wasn't in plain sight in the overworld. The dungeon is only revealed by going to a specific pond and playing the recorder to make the water in the pond recede, because, of course, and this reveals the underground passage to the dungeon. How does playing a recorder make the water go down? I don't think I will ever understand that. I get that it's magic or whatever, but I never felt like this was properly hinted at, so I take back any shame I had in Googling this. It's silly, and I don't think I would have figured it out otherwise. But whatever, I'm in the dungeon now. I don't know where else to mention it, but on a second playthrough, I really enjoyed running into the enemy that's hungry in this dungeon. It annoyed me on my first time playing the game, and I hated leaving the dungeon when I found out I had to buy meat in a shop in order to feed the enemy just so I could pass through a dungeon room. But on a second playthrough, when I went in with the meat already in my inventory, I found the moment charming. As soon as you hear the tip from the old man about the secret in the nose, you're already clued in that the dungeon will probably be a giant face, and the dungeon plays with that in some interesting ways. Looking at the map, you see a mouth, the aforementioned nose, and a grayed out eye where a room is missing from the map. Or I assumed that there wouldn't be a room there, but a well-placed bomb revealed a gap in the wall that led me to the eye room. A very clever hidden puzzle indeed. There were several hidden passages through puzzles like that. Bombable walls, stairs revealed through pushing blocks. I guess it makes sense. For a dungeon that was literally behind a secret entrance itself, that it should have secret entrances throughout the dungeon as well. I think it's really clever, and I really enjoyed it just kind of as a trope. I think it's excellent, and it's one of the best dungeons I've played in this playthrough so far. But with the Triforce complete at last, let's compare it to the final dungeon and follow a clue I'd received in the last dungeon to follow and find Spectacle Rock. So I remember basically where it was in the overworld. So I found the entrance, bombed it, and entered the final dungeon of the game. This is it. Man, what surprisingly quick playthrough it's been. I know the Life of Luxury perks made a difference, but I've still been surprised. My first playthrough was agonizing in a way, not in a negative way, I want to be clear, but I was struck at how hard the enemies were. It felt brutal, and that just hasn't really been as much of a problem this time, thank God. So I'll also go ahead and say, the overworld feels different this time too. I feel less daunted by it. Maybe because it's my second playthrough, but I remember being intimidated by this game. It offered very little direction, and I remember feeling just so lost at first. On my first playthrough, I was worried that I wouldn't find the right path. But while on this playthrough, I joyfully allowed myself to do dungeons out of order, explore the world at my own pace, and see what path I could make for myself. I feel like I finally get Zelda 1 the way it was described to me as a kid. I feel the sense of wonder at a world that's truly mine to explore. It reminds me of playing Breath of the Wild for the first time, or even what it was like to play Wind Waker as a kid, or, to just run around and see what kinds of things I might just stumble upon. I don't know what's out there, but if I look, my curiosity will be rewarded. It just takes a little courage. But the game's not over yet. Let's beat this final dungeon and finish it. This dungeon is really solid, with some interesting challenges. Honestly, if you don't really know the shape of the dungeon well, the map won't even be a lot of help for two reasons. One, the shape of the dungeon isn't super linear, there's twists and turns and you're not exactly sure what direction you're headed. Two, rooms exist in several connecting patterns joined only by staircases that transport you across these segmented sections. This means that just because you're near a room, it doesn't make it easily accessible to you. In order to get from one room to another, you have to actually learn the layout of the dungeon, memorize it, and backtrack with intentionality. It's the kind of thought process that would be mastered through more interesting dungeon design in later Zelda games, but the seed is not just planted here, but planted solidly. It's a great end to a great start for the series. How dungeons change throughout the Zelda series is definitely interesting. Like I've said before, while Zelda dungeons tend to be known for their puzzles, the philosophy of this game almost feels more like an Arkham game. You walk into a room, and there may be a puzzle, but the main challenge in a dungeon is primarily just taking on enemies, especially groups of enemies. That's what the dungeons of Zelda 1 are about. It's definitely combat-focused first, and it's a pillar of the series worth recognizing its weight. But anyway, let's talk about the final boss of level 9, Ganon himself. It's definitely an interesting fight. Ganon is huge, a giant enemy worthy of being your greatest nemesis thus far. You walk into a room laid out with a skull pattern on the floor, and you feel the pressure. Ganon turns invisible, and it's your job to essentially just predict where Ganon is and slash at his invisible body. That's the fight. It feels dramatic enough, especially at the end of a challenging dungeon, but it's really nothing too crazy. It might be difficult since Ganon takes a good many hits to go down, but it's not a particularly interesting fight. Or so I thought. The fight seemed to be going on forever. And then I realized I didn't have the silver arrows. So I let myself die. And then I went back into the dungeon and pursued the missing weapon, and it was almost embarrassing. I was so close to victory and yet was just missing that final ingredient. I was ready to beat the game, but alas, this was a conquerable challenge still. Victory was still so close. I explored the dungeon, running around in circles until I found a room I hadn't been to yet, and eventually, it led me to the silver arrows. I took them, returned to Ganon, and confident that I was capable enough at last, allowed my heart to run out as I wailed on him, unconcerned with defeat. I tasted victory. I was confident. I almost died, and then I took a potion, restored my hearts, and kept fighting. Then, at last, Ganon blinked red. He was vulnerable. I took a shot with my silver arrow, and he turned to dust. At last, Ganon was dead. I walked ahead a room, rescued Zelda, and the credits rolled. Before I begin my review, I just want to say, it really was great to replay this game. It went by quick, and it really was fun getting lost in the world and in the dungeons. It captured me the way I imagine it could have in the 1980s. But there are so many things I'm glad the Zelda series continued to improve upon. This game is good enough, and it's a lot of fun if you're willing to be self-guided and are okay with being lost every now and then. But it is missing some things that later Zelda games will be known for. Its story is bare bones, and it hardly has any true puzzles in its dungeon, for instance. But let's get into the rankings. I'm going to be using a 5-star system as I go through all of my criteria. 0 stars is abysmal. 1 star is extremely lacking. 2 stars, I would say, is fairly lacking. 3 stars is average or serviceable. 4 stars is above average. And 5 stars is masterful. So let's start with the core gameplay: controls, items, and menu navigation. The controls are definitely lacking compared to other 2D entries.
There's no diagonal movement, you can only go up, down, left, or right. Your sword swings are short, and there's no spin attack, no jumping, no sprinting, and no rolling. I'm missing some of those features for sure, but the lack of them never got in my way. Sure, it's basic, but I always felt like I was able to avoid enemies if I was nimble enough. I never felt held back by the controls, so for that reason, I'll give them 3 stars for average or serviceable. Now for items. The items are a mixed bag. Some of them are useful, but some of them have hardly any utility. The candle is hardly ever usable, and especially the recorder seems to have been made just to fill an item slot. Items like the arrows and bombs are incredibly useful and make great introductions in this game, setting up their long-running return throughout the series, but as a whole, the item roster is a little underdeveloped. I'd give it 1 star if it weren't for the aforementioned arrows and bombs, so with that in mind, I'll give the items 2 stars for fairly lacking. Now for menus, the menu system is unobtrusive. It's easy to pause, reselect items, and return to gameplay without feeling like the pace is broken. It's simple, but it gets the job done, no complaints. However, the file select screen is aged with its use of the select button to navigate options, and its use of strange terms for save data management with options to register your name, or you can select elimination mode, assumably to delete your save file. It's aged, and I have to take a point off. So for that, I'm going to give the menu 4 stars for above average, but not perfect. Now let's talk about Zelda 1's combat, breaking down combat mechanics and enemy AI. So the mechanics, Link has a couple of options for combat. He can use his sword, which stabs enemies at close range. This means it's only useful when he gets close to enemies, making him vulnerable. So there's a good trade-off of danger for reward there. You have the luxury of range attacks, but always at a cost. You have sword beams that can shoot across the room to damage enemies, but you only have access to them when you're at full health. You're rewarded with power if you're able to prove you've earned it, so it's always satisfying being able to use your sword beams when you can. You also have arrows for range attacks, but they drain rubies, which for different reasons you may want to hold on to, whether that's to save up for potions, keys, or anything else sold in stores. Either way, power always comes at a cost, and I think it's balanced well in this game. Sure, the sword is limited, and with just a thrust, I missed the spin attack from later games as I mentioned earlier, but it's a well-balanced combat system that deserves credit where it's due, and for that, I'm giving it 4 stars. Now, for enemy AI, I'm not a developer, this is just based upon my intuition and experience as a player. I expect that the enemies of Zelda 1 are probably more complex than I'm even aware of, but I just can't help feeling that most of their movement is based on randomness. That said, the developers did well to make it so that it wasn't too simple for a swarm of enemies to surround the player with no way out. They wait their turn to attack, and it leads to combat that feels mostly pretty fair. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, but the enemies are solidly designed. They have a range of weaknesses too, depending on enemy type. There's variety and interest, but it still feels simple almost to a fault, and for that, I'm giving enemy AI 3 stars. So, let's now discuss the level design of Zelda 1, starting with unpacking the overworld. To be fair, I think the overworld is designed pretty solidly, but the map isn't huge, and the world certainly feels small. There's attempts to gate off progression, requiring certain items or information in order to traverse through a certain region, like the raft, and ladder being used to cross certain bodies of water, but these attempts to gate overworld progression really are insignificant compared to the success of a gated overworld like Link's Awakening's island, which manages to feel huge because you just can't explore all of it until later in the game when you have the required items. In Zelda 1, the entire overworld becomes accessible pretty quickly. I have mixed feelings, but I do think it's fairly successful. I'll give it 3 stars. Now, for overworld aesthetics. So, aesthetics not just means visuals, it actually really I'm referring to the look of the world itself, really the ideas of the world building, right? So for a first outing, Hyrule is geographically diverse, with mountains, rivers, lakes, and dense forests. You have Lake Hylia, the Lost Woods, and Death Mountain already established here in this game. There is a sense of it feeling not just like a maze, but like a world. Apocalyptic and empty in its own way, but a world nonetheless. There are several screens that run together, though, and many places lack names. There are no towns or named shops either. It's the bare minimum for a world, and as fun as it is to explore, regardless, I'll say it's fairly lacking, and would give it 2 stars. Now, dungeon design. The dungeons are fun, but relatively basic. You'll see a lot of the same types of puzzles, and it's a strong start, but there isn't much to chew on. For instance, every block-pushing puzzle is kind of the same. It feels pretty similar. You get keys by defeating all of the enemies in a room, and that never changes. What keeps it interesting is that the layouts of the dungeons change, and navigating through levels might require different levels of spatial awareness, but it isn't super complex. Most of the dungeon layouts are pretty linear, too, with only a couple of exceptions from the later ones. It's a strong start and almost serviceable, but the repetition brings it down. 2 stars. Now, for dungeon aesthetics, the dungeon also, they all kind of bleed together too. The difference in color between different levels is something but very basic. I don't associate a difference in world building between levels 2 and 3, for instance. They just feel like one homogeneous underworld. The feeling of being in an underworld works, and it feels dark and dank and dangerous, but the lack of variety makes it hard to be intellectually invested in any of the dungeons as actual locations, which is the kind of engagement later Zelda games allow. It's harsh, but I have to give it 1 star. Now, side quests. The thing is, there's hardly any NPCs in the map, just shopkeepers and old wise men scattered in caves or dungeon rooms. Side quests just amount to whether or not you'll pursue certain item upgrades or additional heart containers. Maybe it's not fair to be so harsh retrospectively, but I am judging this with a modern eye, and while I don't hold technical limitations against the game, I still feel like the side content was extremely lacking, so I'm giving it 1 star. Now let's unpack the story design. Starting with the overall game structure, I adored my experience with the main quest this time around. When you start the game, you can go in any direction, and I really felt that throughout my playthrough. It was always up to me where I went, and I could end up in a dungeon I wasn't prepared to complete. Or I might end up in a later dungeon that happened to already, I might have been able to complete. There was no way of knowing until you tried, but more often than not, I wasn't intimidated by doing dungeons out of order. And I felt rewarded for finding the levels in my own way and along my own path. Sure, I miss the more developed stories of later Zelda games, but I think given this approach, it's a practically flawless structure for the game, and promotes replayability as you might return to the game to have a unique experience each time. In that way, it definitely felt like a proto Breath of the Wild, and for its structure, I give it 5 stars. Now for the writing, it's hard to judge the writing because there isn't much of it, but what there is works. Sure, there's some funny dialogue that doesn't feel translated properly, but in general the story is bare bones, but it's certainly good enough, and I don't feel the need to take points off except for the aforementioned mistranslations. I'll give the writing 4 stars. Now cinematics, there isn't really much in the realm of cinematics for this game. There's an opening scroll of text like Star Wars where you get the background information for the story, and it's presented well. In general, the animations are basic but effective. However, Zelda 1 does rely a lot on screen flashes, and it's not necessarily pleasant to look at, especially when beating dungeons and receiving pieces of the Triforce. So for that, I'll give the cinematics 3 stars. They do the job, but aren't anything special. Now let's talk about the visuals. For the art style, it's a mixed bag for me. While I love the character sprites and how cute and squashed they are, and same with the enemies, I feel like the use of color is very bland overall. For instance, the ground of the overworld is a flat beige most of the time, and it's not terrible, but it is lacking. So I feel that I have to give it 2 stars. Now for textures or sprite work. This is a 2D game, so there will be sprites. The sprites are well designed and are able to do a lot of it with only a couple of pixels. I did feel a lot of intentionality in the pixel art, and it works. I think it's definitely held back by technical limitations, and I can't take off too many points, but they get the job done. 3 stars. As for the tile work, some of the tiling of sprites in the overworld looked messy, like the look of repeating trees, for instance. But also the way the tiles were used in the dungeons to create the illusion of 3D walls was effective. In general, the repeating tiles didn't annoy me, and I know the NES comes with limitations, so I want to be fair. I'll give it another 3 stars for tile work. Now for the HUD, I really have no complaints with the HUD. It's simple, but packs a lot of information, and it doesn't look too dense or confusing either. The map is made with, it's made kind of abstract at the top of the screen, and the hearts always felt less than a glance away. I think the pixel art is effective and communicative, and I'm giving the HUD and UI 5 stars for it. Now for the final category of criteria, let's discuss the game's soundtrack, starting with the music. Oh, for the music, what can I say that hasn't already been said? The music for this game is absolutely iconic. Maybe the loops are relatively short, but I'm trying not to hold technical limitations against these games. That said, due to the lack of variety and the shortness of these tracks, I have to dock points. But otherwise, these compositions are beautiful, evocative, and perfect for what they are. And I think I feel good about giving the music 4 stars. Now for music production, to be quick in discussing it, I never felt that the chiptune, I never felt that aesthetic hindered the delivery of the music. Maybe to my ears, I was only getting a couple of sine waves, but in my heart, it felt like an entire orchestra. The simple synths were chosen well, and the music still sounds good to listen to all these years later. 5 stars. Now, the sound effects, they're also iconic. Shooting your sword beam, collecting a heart, damaging an enemy, the sound of a dungeon boss muffled from behind a wall or room over, it's masterful. 5 stars. Same with the music. I never considered the sound effects to have limitations. They always made me feel just the right thing, and so to me, they're perfect too. Now, with all of the individual criteria discussed, let's tally up the scores. My final grade for Zelda 1 on the NES is 63%. I do feel like it's kind of low considering how much fun I had, but there are a lot of things holding this game back, things that will be done better in later Zelda games. That said, I still really recommend Zelda 1. I had a lot of fun with it. In my heart, it gets an A+, but my critical eye definitely had some things to say. Let me know if y'all agree with my conclusion. Stay tuned for future videos, and thanks for watching, y'all. Comment down below your thoughts on Zelda 1, but without further ado, I'll let y'all go.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.